So today on Recruiting Roundtable, we're exploring the world of VC talent partners. This is probably the second or third episode we've done, and none two are the same. We with each VC having their own unique process and approach. With every VC talent partner I speak with, it's always like a little bit different. They're all working towards the same goal. They want to help their portcos be successful and hire great people, but the way that they do it is a little bit different. So I love this topic, and I have two amazing guests joining us today. I have Tanaz Mody, Head of People and Operations at Lerer Hippeau, and Cecilia Ng, Talent Partner at MVP Ventures. Tanaz, Cecilia, thanks so much for joining today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So let's start just briefly with some intros. Love to hear, just please introduce yourself and a little bit about your role and your company. Let's start with Tanaz.
Sure. So my role at the firm is head of people and talent, and I actually have a dual function, functioning both internally as head of people and talent, and then also supporting our portfolio company founders to lay strong foundations on the people and talent front. I have a background in operating, primarily on that 0 to 1 phase, and so I absolutely love it. So I'm been with the firm now for a year and a half, and this is totally my sweet spot. Building up and helping founders lay those strong foundations.
That's excellent. And also, Lerer Hippeau has an amazing office in New York. Go check them out. A great building. I was there, was it last week? And we had a nice meeting in person. So thanks for hosting me.
Not a bad view of the Statue of Liberty, right?
I have a picture of a little bit grainy picture of Statue of Liberty, but it has a very beautiful view. It's much better in person than it is on the picture. I'll tell you that. Cecilia, you're next. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. So I am here with MVP Ventures as the talent partner. I help support our early stage founders. We have upwards of 85 portfolio companies, and there could be ad hoc problem statements that other portfolio companies may come to us for, but we have definitely seen our founder-led hiring where there's a lot more just organic need for the type of support that we can provide. So probably similar to Tanaz in terms of helping build some of the nascent processes and infrastructure, helping them pressure test the way that they're thinking about hiring, and then sourcing and coming up with some profiles that we think could be a good fit. Sometimes that could also be in the form of an advisor just to help solidify the way that they're thinking about a particular role. So I've been with the firm for about a year and a half now. And prior to this, I spent some time with Human Capital, a different venture firm. Bulk of my career has been in tech with companies like Facebook and Robinhood. And prior to that, I spent some time abroad in Hong Kong and Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I spent a lot more time with the companies that I worked with, such as Moody's and Whirlpool, in the specific hiring that they had for those specific geolocations. So a lot broader in comparison to the pipeline hiring that I may have done in-house. But yeah, it's definitely been really exciting to work with the early stage and understand how they're building something from the ground up.
That's great. Thank you, Cecilia. I mean, and one thing I both noticed is both of you have quite a bit of talent acquisition experience. So I'm really excited to dig in today and just learn a lot more. It was interesting too, Cecilia. I noticed, like, I was just kind of taking a note of some of the companies you mentioned. Noticed you worked for a lot of like larger, more like enterprise-y type companies, and now you're more in like the startup space. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, lastly, my name is Sean Huynh. I'm the host of this podcast. I work for a company called Rocket, and we take a scientific approach to recruiting. We combine our talented recruiters with our AI model. We've been training over 7 years, and our programmatic sourcing techniques, and we find and engage candidates in ways that are impossible to do in other channels like LinkedIn. So really cool company, and that's who we are. So all right, let's jump into it. In terms of, let's start broad strokes, right? As I mentioned to both of you, I started this podcast because like the last 4 years have been kind of like mind blowing in terms of, COVID and then post COVID, and everyone's hiring and then no one's hiring and everyone's getting laid off and now people are hiring again. What are some of in your positions currently, right, at both MVP and Lerer Hippeau? What have you noticed in the world of talent acquisition? Let's time box it to the last 12 months. What have you kind of noticed as general trends as it relates to, has it become more of a candidates market? Is it still an employer's market? Have there been sort of major changes you've seen in recruiting in the last 12 months? Let's start with Cecilia.
Yeah, I would say definitely in the past 12 months, I've noticed companies and founders really becoming even more just conscientious of how they want to hire and how they want to keep a lean team. I think that has definitely been a focus in how can we do more with less.
And you're
Because
saying like a talent acquisition team, you mean?
talent acquisition as well as just thinking about hiring in general.
Mhm.
So a lot of the founders that I support, they don't have dedicated recruiting folks that are helping them with that. They may be doing a lot of this work themselves. Obviously, we try and lean in as best as we can, and then also make some suggestions and partners that they may be able to work with. But just thinking about headcount as well, and how can we build a team that can get us to that next inflection point, and really think about also, when I think about this as well, is when you're hiring, it's great that you know that you need the bandwidth, but you also know what your team is capable of doing, where they spike and where their strengths are, and how can you build a team that complements any gaps that may exist, versus maybe in the past, people may think, well, we know we need to do work. Let's just hire as many good people. If we see someone great, let's opportunistically bring them onto the team. And yes, sometimes that can work out because you just want to hire really amazing people, but you can hire someone really amazing, but you just don't have the right role for them and the right type of work and scope for them to really kind of lean in. And so that can create tension within the team as well, because you also want to make sure, as you're thinking about how you grow that team and empower your team, that your team members are also really excited about the work and the scope that they get to continue to operate in. And so I think that there's just a lot more thoughtfulness around that, and how can we maintain a lean team while also being able to get the right bandwidth, and in terms of thinking about burnout and all that.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely want people to feel like their days are like being productive, right? And that they have something to accomplish on a day-to-day basis, right? Whereas in before, I think there was kind of like this hire at all cost mentality. It was like, we just need to hire. Like, I need 100 engineers. I'm like, why do you need 100? It sounds like a very round number, but I don't know. Like, we got a $20 million check. That's why we need 100. I'm like, sure, okay, no problem. I'll help you. Tanaz, what have you seen over the last year?
It's interesting. I was chatting with someone earlier this week, and we were going down memory lane to like 2020 and like the instability you felt and like how the markets were changing. And then all of a sudden the two of us started going back to like 2016 and realizing that like it almost has been 10 years in the HR and talent space where we have felt this like fluctuation of extremes over the course of time. And I would say, yeah, there was definitely the hire fast in 2020 when the market was so hot going into 2021 when you could not get enough candidates. I'm 100% on the same page with Cecilia of what I'm seeing in the market. Founders are being so thoughtful. I think they are not hiring as fast as they used to. And they're being so careful, even from like an org structure standpoint, and they're being thoughtful like they always should have been. So we maybe then would have avoided all of those layoffs that we had a year or two ago. And I still actually think those layoffs are happening, and they're happening for different reasons. But yeah, founders are just being extra thoughtful on their org structure and how they want to build out and how they want to develop their people, to then who do they need to hire, and looking for that like exceptional talent. I think there's no exceptions at this point. There is talent in the market, and they should find their perfect candidate.
I mean, the bar's always been high, but I feel like it's like been raised a notch or two lately.
I feel like at one point in time, like the bar was lowered just a little bit when like if you could not find any talent. And now I know that the bar is back up, which feels right and feels like you said, like should have always been there. But I do think there were exceptions made, and then corrections later happened.
Well, as someone who's run an agency, I don't mind when the bar comes down just a little bit.
You don't have any of those candidates, so it doesn't even matter.
That's right. I want to stay with you, Tanaz. We talked a little bit last week about the shine in tech, and has it come off a little bit? Because there's some people that flock to tech, let's say in 2015, 2016 timeframe, and they were seeing buckets of money being made. I was one of them in 2013. I was working in finance, and I moved from a discount brokerage to Salesforce because I was like, I don't want to sell software because apparently you make tons of money doing it. And I know other people had that similar thought. Maybe they got into software engineering or tech sales or, something software SaaS related. Do you feel like the shine's kind of come off a bit in tech and people are saying like, well, maybe because all the layoffs, tech's not really, all that?
I do think it has in a certain way, and it's the instability is felt everywhere. Maybe it's just amplified in a certain market like tech. And my parents were always of the sort of like, how can you go and be so risk averse to like, how can you go join an early stage company? You have children, you have a house. And I'm like, I know exactly how much money is left in the bank, and I know exactly what's happening. And so I think people's risk tolerance has changed over time. And tech has now been around for a while. And so talent is now weighing what they want to emphasize more within their career and their lives. And now you're seeing, I remember, and I'm maybe dating myself, but like, I remember when UX came out, and it was like a thing and a profession for people to get into. And it was the hottest thing. And now you have people who have been in that space now for 10, 12 plus years and are seasoned. And like now they're taking on different roles at different types of places. And so I think the shine has come off in a way because now people see not every tech company is going to be successful. So, but it's still shiny.
Interesting. So Cecilia, I want to go to you on this. You've come from working at really, steady organizations. I'm looking through your thing here. We're like Whirlpool, Facebook, right? And now you're in this startup tech space. Have you seen, a change in risk aversion to getting into tech or staying into tech versus what you saw maybe 10 years ago?
I think, interestingly, and maybe, of course, this will always be one select group, is they become even more, just willing to take a risk instead of saying, well, if I'm going to join a Facebook or a Google and potentially get laid off, why don't I really go and find a problem? Because I think that used to be the big divide, right? And I think I was definitely part of that camp too, of, well, let's go to a Google, let's go to a Facebook. They're very steady, and you just kind of know what to expect. It's very predictable. But I think the type of work I've always enjoyed has always been, I think, in a smaller environment, because you get to wear more hats and you get more scope and visibility. And now I think people are like, well, I don't necessarily get that stability for the trade-off of working in a very narrow swim lane. Why don't I go ahead and take the leap to go to a smaller environment where now it almost feels like I'm getting the best of all worlds? And sure, it may be a little bit riskier, but now in comparison, it's not, there's not such a big disparity.
Sorry, go ahead, Tanaz. No,
I think there is something there of like the risk tolerance is there. And then also I think because people have now seen large successes, they are now emphasizing equity more than I've seen in the past. Understanding they're not going to get more cash up front. And that is where I think tech is starting to shine, of where people understand if they're going to generate real wealth, they're going to do it not potentially through like certain avenues, and other avenues may have a higher chance of it. And one of them may be taking on a massive risk of taking a 50% pay cut with some equity at a startup you believe in, and can make an impact on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, so I've done a lot of recruiting both in Canada and US. And one interesting point I've kind of realized is that I think it depends on where you are. If you, let's say, are in the Bay Area and some other peers or maybe yourself have worked for a startup where there's some type of acquisition or exit and you're able to actually cash in, your shares vested and you cashed in. I think there's more openness. I found that for whatever reason, a lot of the candidates in Canada, they're more interested in like cash compensation than those who are in maybe Bay Area, New York. I think maybe that has something to do with it. I wanted to ask, this is kind of I don't say it's controversial, but it's an interesting topic I hear about every once in a while when I'm scrolling through LinkedIn. I want to get everyone's feedback. So, Cecilia, I want to ask you about this because you mentioned when you first start in your career, you were thinking, hey, let's get some big logos, right? You worked at Google, you worked at Verizon, you worked at Whirlpool, you worked at Facebook. But then there's people that on LinkedIn, they'll put X Facebook, X Amazon, X Google, etc. What are your thoughts on this? I'm just gonna leave it there. What do you think about people that frontline headline, they put all their all the fancy FANG companies they work for?
I think definitely if I see that on LinkedIn, it does call attention, right? Because we know that they hold a certain standard and they have this certain bar for talent. So I think naturally you're like, oh, it's a brand that I recognize. I more or less understand how those companies operate and like how those people kind of how they maybe think about certain things and approach certain things. But I think for an earlier stage startup, that's simply not enough to be like, oh, I'm X these big brands, because it's such a different environment building 0 to 1. The level of ambiguity, the level of being able to work on something for months and break that all down and like redo it, that just level of grit and tenacity is very different from the predictability, right? And so what are other things that would kind of enrich your profile? Like, what have you done and how can you paint the narrative of teams that you were a part of, right? Because I don't think there's ever one story to tell and there's ever one narrative. It's really, how did this person operate within this larger organization? What do they actually like look for? What actually brings them joy in their day, right? And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, is like, how do you fulfill your day? And that it simply, you wouldn't be happy if, that's a type of environment that you've always enjoyed. And you'll naturally see that in someone's like career progression, as well as like teams that maybe they have worked on and whatnot. So I guess long answer to that is, yes, it does call some attention, but you just have to dig a little bit deeper to understand if it's an earlier stage company that this person would really enjoy working in.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Tanaz, what are your thoughts on this?
Similar in a way where I worked for Google Bloomberg early on in my career, Google and Bloomberg separately. And, and I like every experience I had led me to where I am today. And I'm so thankful for all of them, even the successes and the failures in the startup space. And if I didn't have that infrastructure of a big company, how do their processes work? How do they scale at a certain point in time? I don't think I could do the job that I have today. And so to Cecilia's point, it's like, we have to make sure that they understand what they're getting into. I have founders who get so excited by big FANG companies and like, I just hired a CTO from Facebook, and it's like, oh no, straight? or what would you like? Let's go back for a second. Let's go back to your interview process and make sure they know what they're getting themselves into. And like, sometimes you see it be a massive success and it's like exactly where this person will thrive. And other times you see them trying to bring in, Amazon's review system and implement it in a 15-person company. And that's where it breaks down of like, they have to know where to take their learnings and modify it accordingly, and then even just scale it the right way. And I can only imagine, if I see it on the people side, what they're experiencing internally within their own space.
Interesting. So I want to stay with you, Tanaz, on that, because but you both work with founders. So like, let's kind of pivot into like your day to day. With working with founders, you mentioned it's interesting. You had a founder who got excited that they hired a FANG, engineering leader, whereas in other founders, they may have a bias towards like I'll be honest. When I onboard a client, one of the first questions I ask is FANG. Is that good or bad? Like what? And there's never a middle ground. Like there's usually some type of like, I guess there is a middle ground. Like some people like it could be good, it could be not so good. But a lot of times there's like I love it or I'm not really into it.
Yep.
When you're working with your founders and they have, let's say, very strong opinions on one way or another, whether it's FANG or not FANG, or whether it's I like people who worked at banking or didn't work at banking, how do you take that kind of feedback? Like, do you just take it at face value, or do you ever, have a discussion with it and push back because you've seen difference because you've worked with so many porcos? What's your strategy to handling those conversations when a founder has a very strong opinion one way or another about something? Tanaz, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. Well, every person is unique. And everybody has their own biases towards certain things and their own formed opinions of like certain companies and how they're run, to where they would want people from there or not want people from there. And so I think it's just like, it's diving into it, right? It's diving into like, why do you not want someone from a larger company if I think they should be thinking otherwise or looking at different types of profiles? And sometimes if they're so gung-ho on hiring someone from big tech, I'm perfectly fine with it. Again, like you said, like they have a bar of talent that they don't move, which is great.
Mhm.
And what do your interviewing screening questions look like? Have you clarified your operating principles to be able to interview for that culture fit? What does that look like for you? So you're hiring the right person and you're using the right valuation as you talk to candidates. And like, just because someone has a Google or a Facebook on their profile, are they the perfect person for this role? Well, actually, the way we work as a company, they're like, this particular person is not. It doesn't mean every single person from those companies is not going to work out. But I hone in so much with my founders around how they operate as a team, how they find that they excel, and making that part of like that culture fit, because there's values and then there's truly how you operate day to day. And I like drill into that piece quite hard for my first meeting.
That makes sense. This is getting juicy. Cecilia, how do you handle your conversation with founders? I'm interested.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what Tanaz, talked about, just it makes a ton of sense. I don't know if I have a ton to add because it is very personal. And I think the only thing is, at the end of the day, you want to hire the best person, and opening up your options and talking to more people will never hinder that, because you will always gain a new perspective. So I think if it's one thing, is I try and coach them to just be a little bit more open-minded. You don't have to change your mind, but kind of go down a one, this one track of, I'm not going to look at anything else. Sometimes you just kind of project what you're going to end up with, versus like being able to see what the possibilities are.
It brings in biases, right? It brings into the fact that there's people at Google who work on side projects and like they might be perfect for an early stage company. It's just, are they ready? Like if it's a manager coming in as a manager at a Google level, coming in at a VP of engineering, are they okay still being hands-on because they have no one else on their team? Like the scope of work also matters. And then even just maybe what they've done previously or on the side to help their neighbor or a friend or whoever it is.
100%.
I love what you mentioned about projecting. It's funny, when I talk to our recruiters and my recruiting team, when I ran my shop, I always we would always make assumptions on a profile. Like you'd be looking at LinkedIn profiles or resumes, and we'd say, "Oh, well, this candidate maybe not interested in this because she did this," right? And I'm like, "Why are you projecting what that person's gonna think?" Or how, like you kind of have to have a discussion and get to know the candidate, because but unfortunately a lot of what we do in talent acquisition, we do project our own biases and our own thoughts based on the words that are written on a profile or on a resume, because we kind of have to, because we don't have time to talk to 2,000 people. But it's kind of an inexact science. So both of you are very interesting, because Cecilia, you have about 85 portcos that you manage, and Tanaz, I think that's in the hundreds at Lerer.
It's near 400. Yes.
It's near 400.
I don't work with all of them at the same time, just to be clear.
It's a little bit different. So I guess my question is, how do you prioritize your time to make sure that those that need your support get your support and get your attention. Let's start with Cecilia.
Yeah, honestly, we have just seen. I remember when I first onboarded, at the time there were already companies that we have made investments, and we reached out, and there were some founders that I met with, and maybe there were some ad hoc problem statements I was able to kind of lean in and help solve. But we've really seen our founder-led hiring, especially with recently deployed capital, when the founders are very heavily involved. They don't have any other recruiting kind of resources. And that's where I think we are able to make the most impact because we to making end-to-end hiring. It's just not possible. And I think often incentives are not necessarily aligned. And so with between kind of onboarding and working with these founders a little bit more closely, and I meet them where they are. Some are open to meeting on a weekly cadence until they kind of close those roles. Some are like, hey, just send me some great candidates when you come across them. We always want to make sure that we're maximizing the time we spend with them as much as we can. And then when folks reach out, whether we see it through investor, updates and asks and requests, then we try and dig in a little bit deeper and like, how can we actually help with something like this? I also work a lot with like our heads of talents. Obviously, I'm not there to teach them how to do their jobs. They're incredible at it, but how can we bring kind of industry benchmarks and things that we may be able to find out from other VC talent partners that we may be seeing, or something that really worked, or make sure you avoid something like this. That's kind of how we see we can bring the most value.
Tanaz, Lerer Hippeau, 400 porcos. Hey, how do you do your job?
It's like it's similar in a way. The later stage portfolio companies, we've been around for a little over 12 years. Like those later stage companies have fully robust teams, and like may reach out from time to time, may join a webinar here and there. And so for one, later stage companies, it's more from like a community aspect that we bring folks together really across multiple different areas and divisions. And then for our earlier stage companies, so our more recent portfolio investments, it's similar to Cecilia. Like the investor updates may be indicators of what's going on. We may have frequent touch points. I think for me, I also try to attack it with our onboarding. And we have a very structured onboarding process. I'm in constant process of changing it, because I think it like constantly needs to evolve as I get more and more into my role. I've also been in my role for about a little over a year and a half. And so with my founders, I think what I've learned over time is it's helpful to be a bit more of teaching upfront what to be mindful of. And again, because my scope of role is both people and talent, I try to make sure from like the element, I'm going to go back to operating principles. Like, how are you going to run this place? Like this is yours. You have a blank canvas. Like the back of my walls, if I'm wearing all white, it's all white. Like, what is this going to look like? This is going to be your team. How do you want to put this together? How do you want to pull this together? Who do you want to pull together? How do you want this to work? And then what are potential blind spots that you have as a founder that we need to make sure as we build out the org structure that then we are being mindful of, to ensure that you can be the best CEO and go from being a founder to a CEO, and then help them along that journey. And like similarly, sometimes they jump at it and they dive really far deep in with it. And other times they're like, I think I got this. This is my third time.
Yeah. That's good.
In terms of the value that you bring to your respective portcos, and I know it's gonna be individual, like each founder and situations could be a little bit different. But when I look at, and I've talked to probably 7 or 8 VC talent partners in the context of this podcast, I hear a few things regularly. We'll help them hire their first few, a founding engineer, or like their first few employees. We might help them if they're a little bit later stage with implementing tooling or processes for interview processes or an ATS system or something like that. And then others have told me, like benchmark data or like maybe compensation data reports are things that are interesting. Of all those other things that you bring to the table, what do you think the founders, generally speaking, that you work with value the most? Let's start with Cecilia.
I would say a kind of a new perspective, right? And and we talked a little bit about this, is every founder has their own background. Some of them have built companies and have worked at bigger companies. Others may be kind of fresh out of school and doing this for the very first time. And I think just meeting them where they are, and I think asking the right questions and being an active listener and understanding what are they actually trying to solve for and what are things we could bring to the table that can really make a difference. I know sometimes, like when we think about the silver bullet, well, wouldn't it be great if every VC talent partner could just say, hey, here are 3 perfect candidates. All you have to do is interview them and hire one, and then you're done, right? And we just realize that that's never going to be the case, nor for a longer term success. Is that, if that happens and it just, just everything lined up perfectly, great. But then how do you hire your next person? How do you hire the person after that, right? How do you scale your team from 5 to 30 to 100 to 500, right? And I think providing perspective, resources to help build those foundations is like the most important. And that could come in a lot of different forms. I know it's not a perfect answer, but if it's candidates to talk to solidify the way you're thinking about a candidate, like about the role that you're hiring for. Sometimes it could be an advisor because they've never done this before. Let's hear it from someone who has, right? And who has seen around the corner. So yeah, I just feel like there's so many different aspects to what that could mean and what that could look like, depending on the team and what they're ready for. And like what Tanaz talked about is how they actually want to build their team. What do they want that team to actually look like?
Tanaz, thoughts on this?
So I agree with everything that Cecilia said around this. And I think founders, how do you best support your portfolio companies is so dependent on the founder. Again, this is why I have such a hard time, again, been in the role for a year and a half. I have playbooks, but like every time I send out a playbook, I have to modify it. Every time I send out, like, there's no one size fits all for review processes. There's no one size fits all for search plans. There's no one job description that's perfect for every single founder. And so it's about meeting them where they are and seeing how you can be helpful, and not for on my end, because there are so many portfolio companies. If they're not interested, as helpful as I want to be, I can only do so much. And while there's a lot of different forms of talent partners and talent functions within venture firms. And what I've recently kind of like light bulb moment for me, I was like, I should be analyzing more of our co-investors on specific deals. And if they are so, like, how confusing must it be for founders to get 6 different search firms when they're running a CFO search? Like if MVP and Lerer Hippeau partnered, the 2 of us should connect. And we should be like, hey, I'm going to actually put forward X, Y, and Z. And then that way, this founder is not getting conflicting messaging from 2 people that are experts in the space, that have been in it for a while, that live and breathe it. And they're like, why am I getting different data sets? And like, now they don't know what to do. I don't think we need to confuse our founders. We're all on the same team, post-investment.
So you basically just segue into my next question. And I'm going to start with you, Tanaz, on this, because we talked about this when I saw you last week. So yes, the founders, there maybe have, I don't know, a handful of VCs that have invested in their company. Maybe of those 5 VCs, 3 of them have talent partners like yourselves. And all of them want to get time on the calendar, all want to add value, and all are coming from the right place, because everyone's aligned that if the company grows and scales and does what it's supposed to do, everyone's happy. But what are you doing, if anything, to try to bridge that gap where that there's multiple kind of viewpoints on the problem, so that you can centralize the strategy with your founder, or is that not something that's happening yet? And should it be happening? Tanaz, what are your thoughts on this?
So since our conversation,
What did you action on something? Did you do something? Tell me.
So since our conversation, I actually softballed this with a couple firms in the New York area that we co-invest with from time to time. And while it was, of course we should, but it's, I don't know necessarily how close the partnership could be. And I think it's going to be firm dependent. I think there's some firms that are gunning for number one on everything. And it's like, don't let Tanaz take the front seat on the people front. You got this. This is your thing. And you're like, okay. So I think it's going to be firm dependent in terms of what that relationship looks like post-investment. I do think like we're all on the same team. And my point of view is if Cecilia and I both know a founder that we have that's looking for a CFO, we should talk for 15 minutes and see which is the best search firm and lead that founder in the right direction than having him have 6 different conversations and still have questions and not know what to do. So
it's interesting you mentioned that. Yeah, there's definitely an element of competition. I did think about that, but I was waiting for you to confirm it. So thank you for confirming it.
I did. And the person was like, maybe not.
Yeah.
And like investors in general are competitive people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Investing takes repetitions. Investing takes grit, and with all of that comes competitiveness of being number one. And I mean, I want to be number one. I'm sure.
Cecilia, what about you? This is an interesting topic. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with that more, because at the end of the day, our ultimate goal is to support our founders to do the best that they can and build a generational, right, 30x, 50x company.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, I think, when we think about just the mechanics of investing, right? If your company is able to add value, right, the likelihood of you being able to invest again is much higher. But I think we have to always think about this in service to our founders and the team, and what is actually helpful, right? Because I think sometimes trying to get in front of the founder saying, hey, you got to listen to me. This is, talk to my candidate, don't talk to theirs. Like that, I don't think that's ever received well, because I don't think anyone enjoys that type of approach, right? Where it's very kind of heavy handed. And so we just really need to think about like, how can we be resourceful as best as we can and surface the best people, and at the end of the day, all we can do is present that to our founders and say, hey, here are some options, please take a look. If you're interested, happy to intro. If not, happy to kind of put this on the back burner. What can we actually be helpful with? Because if they're heads down focusing on an ML role, and we keep, because we're working on maybe a separate search and we maybe have folks, we also need to think about the cadence of when we present this, right? Because that's also part of the role. Is I think the judgment of what does this founder actually need? Are we, if we send them that email, is that actually going to be more detrimental because they're so heads down focused on something else? So and we're working with people, right? And as people, when we feel like others are most helpful, what does that look like, and how can we kind of keep that top of mind at all times?
Yeah, that's something that's like extremely consistent across everybody in the platform, like talent function, is we're just trying to be helpful. Early on, I had a founder ask me like how much to partner with me, and I was like, for free. Like, you signed up, like you took a check from us. This is what you like. You get support, and I'm here to be helpful. That's it. So it's just here to be as helpful as possible, and ideally lead them to great outcomes. And that's our job.
It's a great place for you to be, right? Just being helpful. So, okay, this is gonna be the last question. I know we're gonna run late for time, but short answers on this last question. I'm curious because this is a great panel for this. So most VC talent partners I talk to say they're a team of one. I don't know if that's the case. I think that might be the case with both of you here.
Yes.
And I find it interesting because whether it's 20 portcos or 80 or 400, a lot of times is no more than a team of one, maybe 2 max. What do both of you see as like in the future of this function, like the VC talent function, do you see it growing and in the future having, 2, 3, 4, 5 people on their team? And if so, what do you think some of those key functions would be? Let's start with Cecilia.
So very personal opinion. I believe in a leaner team. And, if I were to anticipate our team growing at MVP, I would want to bring someone on that would be my counterpart that can help, maybe slice and dice like the industry and the sector and verticals, and support that way, because I genuinely believe that the way that we're operating is where we can actually make and kind of add the most value. Obviously, when we see larger teams is when they are maybe committing to making certain hires and whatnot. And I think, certainly those models can work. But I just feel like for especially MVP we specialize in co-investing,
Mhm.
that's how we see, and we specialize in early stage. So I think having a really large team to then maybe think about like sourcing or whatnot, sure, I think there's some additive value there, but I would like to think that us partnering directly with the founders and really being that thought partner with them doesn't
Mhm.
require a team of 20 to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're in deep tech, AI, robotics, and so having a verticalized approach, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Tanaz, I think Lerer Hippeau has a wider scope. Like you invest in
Mhm.
any types of companies. So if you saw growth in the VC talent function at Lerer Hippeau, what do you envision that would look like?
I have the same similar philosophy. It's like I would have to hire 100 people to like truly make an impact on like placements. We don't own requisitions. That takes you to understand the company and understand every nuance and be like you want to be true added value. You have to become a recruiter at that company for that one role or 10 roles that they're filling, and that
Mhm.
takes a lot of people and time.
Mhm.
Um, and so for me, I mean, I personally, I haven't even really thought about ever growing my team. What I've tried to figure out is how can I make myself more efficient, more focused. There are so many venture firms out there. When someone takes a check, they're not just taking a check from us. And so where do I personally peak? And the classic answer of how can I use AI?
Okay.
Beautiful. Love it. And with that, you took us home, Tanaz. Thank you so much, Tanaz. This is a really interesting conversation. Appreciate both your time. For those tuning in, we appreciate you checking us out. And until next time, happy hunting.